You know, I heard this saying once that every billionaire is a policy failure. Truer words have never been spoken. Billionaires, in my opinion, don't have a right to exist. The very existence of billionaires shows us that we have an economy that is working for the benefit of the few and not the many. I say the same's true for poverty wages and long hours. We need to wipe them out. The labor movement once fought for a vision of work life in which everyone had 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. Sadly, it feels like we've gone so far backwards that we have to fight just to have the 40-hour work week back. Why is that? So another asshole can make enough money to shoot himself to the moon?
Yes, folks. The good news of Shawn Fain, UAW president. Yeah, I love that. I will also just say, as somebody, look, David, we joke about
we do.
ideas sometimes, but I will just say, when a good idea, and maybe not a perfect idea, but a good idea gets into the bloodstream, it's nice to sort of trace how it got there. And I will just say, that's what I want to see from a sort of a synergy between the progressives like AOC and Shawn Fain, because that every billionaire is a policy failure was the display name of AOC's a council advisor that she had for a little bit named Dan Riffle, who I think is now on to Potlaw, yeah. So I mean, he's a true hero. And yeah, it's just great to hear Fain both saying that and also saying, like, yeah, we need to claw our lives back from these people. And you love to see it. You love to see him calling Jeff Bezos and those guys assholes. Like, the energy is really good. And as the strike looms, I believe we're 9-8 days away, depending on where you listen to this. Let's all gear up for this to be, flood the zone with support. See where this goes.
No, I mean, I'll just say on that too, that like one thing like to really appreciate about Fain is like not only him saying some of those things, but the way that he frames these is like it's directed to like the working class as a whole, right? It's not solely just like, I mean, obviously there's a focus, right? He's the president of the UAW. He's pushing for their rights, but he's connecting it to like that larger, like national and even international struggle. And I think that's a damn good thing. Something that we have to get really good at doing, not in the kind of boring way that a lot of progressives do it, frankly, Matt, where like before they talk about anything, they like list off like a bunch of different groups. Like, no, it's like, this is like real rooted kind of talking about your day-to-day life, your neighbors, what your experiences are, that's practical and tangible for people. And dude's got it. I gotta say, he's got it 100%.
Absolutely. And I will just say, Walter Reuther, The Most Dangerous Man in Detroit, I just started that. So if anyone wants to join me in reading that work, which is very interesting, talks about Reuther being over in Germany during the rise of Hitler, and they'd stopped in Germany so it wouldn't look suspicious if they went to Moscow. It's a very good intro, I will say. I've only got a few chapters in, but that book is available online. It's a little bit expensive. It's available in other places that the expense isn't an issue.
Well, we got a fun show for y'all in a little bit. We're going to be talking tech surveillance, which is a really, really important topic. We sort of dive into some of the new technologies and the folks, trying to, make baseball cards of activists.
Yeah.
A really dystopian revelation from Robert.
I mean, it really reminds you of the Bush era War on Terror, where they had like the deck of cards that is like supposedly the terrorists, and it's like, it turns out nobody remembers who like the king of clubs was, because that they got like killed all the time, and they had to just move people up the deck. But yeah, scary stuff, and definitely as we talked about, put in the context of these RICO and terrorism charges for people at Stop Cop City. And I just want to preface this. We talk about the app Signal, we had Jesse Singal on Majority Report, so I'm confused about how to pronounce that word now. And I gave my cynical, the sort of cynics, but I think a good thing to bear in mind when using those sort of apps. But I will just say, in those charges filed this morning, the Georgia law enforcement said, "Oh, they're using these cryptography apps to hide their communications from us," and that in itself is like evidence of wrongdoing. And that is, that's why we need to cover a story like this, because this is a very scary direction this stuff is going.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely an important conversation that'll be coming up in just a little bit. But before, and also don't forget, folks, come join us in the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning. We've been doing a lot of really good stuff on the other side, and you really don't want to miss it, particularly if you're watching a lot of left progressive media. We've been getting a little spicier on the post game. So if you're only getting this half of the show, you're really getting like 30% of what we put out there. So you're going to want to make sure that you sign up and support us and get all the good stuff that we're doing on the other side.
And check out, we're going to talk about Bill Maher tonight, and how he's not partisan when it comes to.
And he's short too. He's a very short guy. I didn't realize how short he was. He was with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan, like, we all know how tall he is now, so he's like a measuring stick. I don't know. I was a little surprised by that, but we won't be focusing too much on height in the post game, but we will be a little bit more.
Respect to the short kings out there.
Sorry, y'all. I'm giddy because we got to get to this main story tonight. It has been an incredible moment for the state of Texas. I mean, we've been seeing the great minds of our time throwing legal arguments at each other. We've been talking about granite. We've been talking about tile. We've been talking about how if you assume, you can't assume without making an ass out of you and me. Just incredible defenses for our disgraced Attorney General Ken Paxton today. And for folks who aren't familiar, he has been impeached by the House. He's under trial right now in the Senate. And it's going to be a long one. It's going to be really fascinating. We have some good clips and things to react to from this first day. I do believe that they might have just ended the first session. So if anything did happen that was very exciting the past hour or so, we might have missed it. Apologies. This is on the 5th of September. But we're definitely going to be covering this as long as it goes on. It might go on for a while. But I mean, like, where to start, Matt? I mean, Ken Paxton is the Attorney General in Texas, and I don't need to give people a whole rundown of what an Attorney General does. It's your chief law enforcement officer, right? And Ken Paxton has run the AG office in some of the most corrupt ways that you can imagine, most notably essentially turning the Attorney General's office into a private concierge firm for disgraced real estate investor Nate Paul. But we're going to get a little bit more into that in just a second. This is a truly historic moment. One, because you're seeing Ken Paxton getting impeached. You're seeing a lot of these things being brought up. And look, this is not brought up by the Democratic Party as much as some of the right wingers are going to make it seem. He's being impeached by Republicans. Why is he being impeached by Republicans? Because he has done a very damn bad job at being the Attorney General. I'll tell you, one of the easiest jobs to hold in public office is being the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Why? Because your job is just to sue the Biden administration. That's what you do. You want to be in the newspaper in the headline, Ken Paxton is leading a bunch of state attorney generals and suing the Biden administration on trying to expand Medicaid or trying to fight drug prices or whatever. Like, we're not big Biden fans on this program, but look, that's what the job is of the Attorney General of Texas. The fact is that, Ken Paxton has made a name for himself in the Republican Party by being that guy, but he also brings in all of his kind of shadiness. This is somebody who has been investigated by the FBI. This is somebody who has had legal scandals plaguing him throughout his entire political career. And this gets brought up. This entire impeachment protocol gets brought up because he yet again went to the Texas House and the Texas government and asked for more money to pay settlements for his wrongdoings. Yeah, I mean, I guess I can break down a little bit of what he's going under, Matt. Stop me if I'm going too fast or anything like that, because I want to get to some of these video. Oh yeah, because one thing that I think is really important for people outside of the state, maybe to sort of recognize, is that one, again, if you don't know the makeup of the Texas House and Senate, the House is dominated by the Republican Party. The Senate is dominated by the Republican Party. The governor is a Republican. The little governor is a Republican, and the Attorney General is a Republican, right? So there's going to be later a lot of claims that this is being run by the Democratic Party, but frankly, what this is a lot of elected officials being fed up with dealing with Ken Paxton's, very clear, in my opinion, corruption.
Right. Can I just jump in there? So, as we always say with regards to the Trump thing, impeachment is not just, oh, you've did a thing so illegal, you're automatically impeached. It's a political process. And so there's definitely like politics here. Now, that he's a corrupt guy, he's been investigated even before office, or like he has a long rap sheet. Not that I like saying that phrase. But he, like, this guy this is not his first run in, I'm curious, do the Republicans are just unhappy with the way I don't take at face value, should we, that it's about the corruption? Is it something else that made them lose their last straw with it?
I mean, I think that some people are like, look, when Ken Paxton, so when the House impeached him, right? When the House moved forward with impeachment protocol against Ken Paxton, there were multiple reports that Ken Paxton had threatened individual members of the House with political ramifications if they voted to move impeachment forward, right? So no, there's a lot of this that is like not so much that the Republican Party is now filled with a bunch of people who are worried about the financial state of Texas, but a lot of people who are like, you know what, Ken Paxton's been bullying me for years, and this is an opportunity for me to get back at him and maybe push him out. And look, we can have again, as I was saying earlier, the job for Republicans, right? The job for Republicans of the Attorney General in the state of Texas is one of the easiest things in the world to do. So there's this kind of question. It's like, well, why have somebody like Ken Paxton doing it if it's going to sort of plague us with these problems? And, he's going to be being a bully to us basically behind the scenes. And he's just constantly asking us for more and more money to deal with his legal problems, right? That's, I think, is not a small factor here.
Don't make yourself a liability where you're not an asset.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically it. So, I mean, look, we're going to play Andrew Murr in a second and talk a little bit more holistically about the first day of this trial. But just maybe to set it up for people who are unfamiliar. There's so much in here that is just really juicy. So I'm going to have to go over it in broad strokes. If you want a more in-depth thing, I've done a whole video on Ken Paxton, I think about a month and a half ago, when the first impeachment vote in the House happened. You can go watch that. But basically, this all centers around Ken Paxton's relationship with real estate investor in the Austin area, Nate Paul. Nate Paul has also been investigated and arrested by the FBI for financial crimes. So this is not somebody who has clean hands in the first place, or allegedly, right? We got to be safe. And it's absurd, right? So one of the things that they're going to focus on, that Pax's defense is focusing on, is this claim that Paxton accepted $20,000 worth of countertop materials from Paul through a contractor, right? And that's super egregious, right? That's super bad. But I think that might be the one that they're going to focus on, because it maybe is the one that Paxton and Paul were a little bit smarter about the way they did it, or maybe it didn't happen. Right. But they're really focusing on that. And I think that's missing the fundamental issue here. What we are really talking about is the fact that Ken Paxton effectively turned the Attorney General's office of the state of Texas into a personal concierge legal service for Nate Paul, going so far as to hiring outside attorneys, Ken Paxton hiring outside attorneys to run interference on Nate Paul's FBI investigation, which, again, as I said earlier, Paul was arrested in June on 8 federal felony charges, right? So these are the, so you know, whatever, these guys are Republicans, so we can say all the things we want to say about them, but you know, you get the job in the attorney general's office, you're like, I'm going to stick it to the woke Democrats and all this kind of stuff. And instead of doing that, you're basically like, hey, can you protect this corrupt real estate guy from getting into trouble with the Federal Bureau of Investigation? That's what's really at stake here. You know, he's been doing that for a long time. And, you know, there's also very fun stuff. He has a mistress. And there's a lot of weird things going on with the attorney general's office and some of the staff in participating, maybe facilitating that relationship. Ken Paxton went by the name Dave P., which I think is very funny.
This is very funny. Yeah. So I have this piece up from Texas Tribune, new accusations. This is from a couple weeks ago. Ken Paxton used burner phone, secret email account, fake Uber name to hide ties with Nate Paul. And just the first couple of paragraphs here. In new allegations revealed Wednesday, Texas House investigators accused suspended AG Ken Paxton engaged in a complex cover-up to hide his relationship with real estate investor Nate Paul, as senior aides grew increasingly concerned about Paxton's willingness to use his office to benefit Paul. The subterfuge allegedly included Paxton and Paul creating an Uber account under an alias so they could meet each other and so the attorney general could visit the woman with whom he was having an extramarital affair. Look, man, you got to keep this stuff cleaner than that, Paxton. Like, this is why he's a liability. If you're doing corruption, you can't just put it all in one corruption basket. You do a burner for your mistress and you do your burner for the corruption.
Look, the bigger problem, the problem is not necessarily like the problem between with him having a mistress, that's between him and his wife Angela. Right. The reason because the political problem is because, come on, Paxton, you can't get caught with that kind of stuff. Like, that's the crime, right? You know what I mean? You can't be so sloppy in doing this. So we have this, right? And also remember that, you know, and I'm going to give these folks some credit too, by the way, because if people remember what was going on in Feinstein's office when she was basically out to lunch for a prolonged period of time, and you got all these kind of sob stories from her staffers about it. Well, these 4 members of the Attorney General's office became whistleblowers and blew the whistle on Ken Paxton's corruption. This is what sparked this entire thing. Yes, because as we've said, Paxton has always had these kind of legal challenges over top of him, but it never really seemed likely that he was going to be impeached. What happened was these people came forward and said, hey, I think that my boss is corrupt. And Ken Paxton allegedly retaliated against them, came at them, and they had to negotiate a settlement for $3 million, right, to pay these people for what he did. Then Ken Paxton comes to the Texas House and asks for them to appropriate $3 million for him to use to pay these people off. And he has done this multiple times where he has used state funds, has requested state funds to be used to deal with his legal problems. And the House says, I don't think we're really interested in that. Also, you need to tell us why. Paxton wouldn't tell them why at first.
I'm the state lawyer. Yeah. I need it.
And we'll get into that state lawyer thing in just a second. So the House said, okay, well, one, we want to know why he needs it. So they do their own investigation that was secret, right? This is the big thing that the far right's getting worked up about, is that this investigation was under wraps all of this time, right? Well, it's because they were trying to get information about the Paxton, who has made it very clear that he is going to put his thumb on the scale, right? As I said earlier, on the day of the vote, multiple Republican House members said that they had gotten calls from Ken Paxton and Ken Paxton aligned folks who said there will be political ramifications if you vote yes on pushing this impeachment process forward. So they investigate why he needs this $3 million in the first place. And then once they uncover what it was about, they say, oh, you know what? We're actually going to go further than this, and we're going to impeach the guy. So this impeachment process has been going on for a little while now, and it just started today. I mean, I can maybe briefly break down how it's working for folks who may be not as familiar. Look, this is a rare thing. I think the last time they did this was in 1917 in the state of Texas. So a lot of these rules are being written as we go. A lot of these things are actually up to the purview of the Texas Senate, how they want to run this as a trial. And what they ended up doing is they got the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, to act as judge. The senators are jurors. There are 16 articles of impeachment. Angela Paxton, who is Ken Paxton's wife and is also a state senator, will sit during this trial, but will not vote or participate in the deliberations. 21 senators are going to be needed to sustain an article of impeachment. If the article is sustained, if any of these articles are sustained, Ken Paxton's impeached. And then the second question will be whether or not Ken Paxton will be blocked from ever holding any elected office in the state of Texas. And I think this is a really important thing to remember too. Again, if you're not familiar with Texas politics, the Texas Attorney General's office is like a rock star position. It is like your in-between position before you maybe run for Senate, before you maybe run for governor. And Ken Paxton, obviously, he's won his elections, right? Multiple. This is somebody who has a lot of support in the Republican Party in the state of Texas. Certainly somebody who would want to maybe take Abbott's job when Abbott is finished being governor, or maybe eventually run for a senator seat. So him being blocked would be very, very significant. The House is basically prosecuting. They have the impeachment managers who are giving a lot of the testimony and sort of laying out the case. They also have their own lawyers, and Ken Paxton also has their own lawyers as well. So we're going to have to see what ends up happening. We can play some clips in a second, maybe just really quick, just about what happened today. Ken Paxton cannot be compelled to testify, was a ruling that happened today. So he still may yet testify, but he can't be compelled. Angela Paxton obviously is not going to be involved in that way. There's big questions about that. And there are some weird ties between Angela Paxton and some other kind of corrupt dealings outside of this, which we can maybe get into later. But the big thing is that today there were two votes. There was a motion to throw out all the articles of impeachment for lack of evidence, and that failed, which meant that a significant amount of Republicans voted to say, we're going to hear this trial. That's a huge defeat for Ken Paxton, right? Because the idea is if this goes partisan, the Republican Party could basically just throw this out immediately. That failed. And then a second motion was asking to exclude evidence from before Ken Paxton's current term, right? And this is really important because the argument that we're getting from Ken Paxton is this very Democratic argument. The people of Texas all decided collectively to vote for Ken Paxton as the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Therefore, by impeaching him, you are stealing the election. Because you're kicking him out of office despite all the support that he got. And look, this is a ludicrous argument for multiple reasons, right? The most obvious one is that, well, I'm sorry, just because you get elected to office doesn't mean that you can just do whatever crimes that you want, or that the people in Texas said, you know what? I like Ken Paxton because he sues the Biden administration. And, I like it if he can do a little bit of fraud and crimes on the side as a treat to reward himself.
I'll tell you how I would accept that argument if during the campaign he was explicit about that. I am a criminal. Vote for me if you want to, forgive me of my crimes. I didn't follow that campaign too closely. I imagine that's not what he was saying.
No, that is not what he was saying at all. So that's ludicrous on its face. But the most important thing here is that a lot of these more significant allegations, they're all significant. The stuff before him was significant, but this whistleblower stuff, these things that have come out now are extremely significant. And no, the voters didn't know about this when they went in to vote, right? So this argument that people are denying democracy is just ludicrous on its face. So we got some more stuff to talk about Paxton, but maybe let's go a little bit to the trial. We have Andrew Murr, who is a member of the Texas House, who is the leader of the of the House impeachment group. This is him laying out the kind of charges against Ken Paxton.
Earlier this year, Mr. Paxton came to the legislature seeking $3.3 million in taxpayer money to settle a whistleblower lawsuit. Mr. Paxton would not answer any questions about the underlying claims. He had successfully blocked any discovery in the case for almost 2 years, and he refused to justify the settlement. The House investigated the serious allegations raised by the whistleblowers. The House uncovered egregious misconduct and abuse of office by the Attorney General of the state of Texas and voted overwhelmingly to prefer articles of impeachment to the Senate. This is why we are here. The allegations in the articles reveal that the state's top lawyer engaged in conduct designed to advance the economic interests and legal positions of a friend and donor to the detriment of innocent Texans. Mr. Paxton turned the keys of the Office of Attorney General over to Nate Paul so that Mr. Paul could use the awesome power of the People's Law Firm to punish and harass perceived enemies. I was raised in rural Texas, where a person's honor is more important than money, where integrity matters, by a family deeply affected by political corruption. This is precisely the type of grave official wrong that our Texas Supreme Court has said warrants impeachment.
So that's the case being laid out by the House, right? And it's pretty damning. And I think that, if you want to be a little bit in the weeds, basically, most of the people who I know who follow the ledger really closely said that the way that those first two votes went on whether or not to throw out all of these accusations outright, that failing, and then the other one to sort of not include anything from before Ken Paxton's current term in office, those failing, does not look very good for Attorney General Ken Paxton.
Yeah,
and also, sorry, just to be really clear too, because I see some people are confused. Murr's a Republican, right? And just for people who aren't familiar, the Texas Senate has 12 Democrats, 19 Republicans, right? Republican dominated, and the Texas House is 86 Republicans, 64 Democrats, right? So a lot of the main players in this operation are Republicans. And that has also led to a lot of conspiracy theories, which we can get to in a second. But go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just looking up some stuff about Murr there in response to that question. And I don't know much about Texas history, but what I do know is about LBJ. And LBJ famously stole an election from his maternal grandfather, Coke Stevenson, who was, I guess, running as a Democrat then. Murr is, like you said, a Republican. But this is in Robert Caro's Path to Power, the first in his LBJ series, where LBJ won Jim Wells County by like 200-1, and so I think it was pretty clear ballot stuffing, but was able to muscle himself into, I believe, into the Senate on that election. So just a little bit of trivia for you.
Totally. So, I mean, we got some really, 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 really fun stuff I want to get to in a second, because this has led to an incredible meltdown in conservative media, right? Steve Bannon, by the way, has been, all over this kind of thing. And there's nothing more exhausting. If I get annoyed at like New York Times reporting on Texas, like Steve Bannon reporting on Texas is some of the most ass backwards shit ever. I'm going to spare you all the Bannon. We'll get to some of the other conservative media.
Is Bannon pro or anti?
He's pro-Paxton, right? Paxton is very much like he's the Trump-aligned guy.
Right.
He was at January 6th, right? That's the kind of politician that Ken Paxton is.
Okay. Yeah.
So I really, really want to get to this fun stuff, but just so we can be a little bit informative and give you all some good information, I want to look at two quick things. I want to play a little bit from the hearing today. One of the main arguments is coming from Ken Paxton's lawyers. But before we get there, I want to remind people of some of the things that Ken Paxton has failed to engage in since he has been the Attorney General. One of the things that is most damning and dangerous about somebody like Ken Paxton is the way that he uses the Attorney General's office. So regularly, he refuses to defend the state and the state's agencies from lawsuits, right? Which basically means that those state agencies or university systems or things like that have to pay out of pocket to cover their fees. The purpose of having an attorney general's office in the system of government that we have in this state and states all across the country is so that the government has lawyers on retainer to defend the actions of the government, right? That could be used good in a good way or in a bad way, right? We're not even getting into that, but that's what the job is. Regularly, he refuses to support state agencies and things that are under his jurisdiction. Texas Tribune has a really great in-depth piece that's out today on that and just how much money it costs the taxpayer, right? Sometimes you got to use the Republicans' language against them, right? This is money that is being taken away from agencies, basically because Ken Paxton is uninterested in defending them. All the while, he's using our money to defend Nate Paul and protect one of his real estate buddies from investigation, right? I mean, it is corruption to the highest extent. He has also regularly been sort of tied up in very strange financial relationships. And I just want to note this before we get into one of the things that I think that his defense is going to focus on, which is the allegation of the corruption via him getting countertops at his house, which I will be honest, I don't think that that's not an issue. But for me, that is not the height of it. The height of it is that what is he doing for Nate Paul? Like, the fact is, like, there's allegations that basically Nate Paul is giving him campaign donations and Ken Paxton is utilizing that. Like, let's say the most legal in the sense of what Nate Paul's side of it is, right? If Nate Paul is just donating a lot of money to Ken Paxton, right? And Ken Paxton is basically turning the Attorney General's office into a tool for Nate Paul, right? That's pay to play. That's corruption. I don't care about the countertops, right? Generally, I care about the fact that he's using the Attorney General's office of the state of Texas to benefit one of his buddies. Now we can, there's going to be talks about, like, did he get illicit money? Did he get all these kind of things? I'm not saying it's not pertinent, but I think that the crime, the one that gets me the most hot and mad, is the fact that he's using our resources as a people to give favors to his buddies. That is the crime here and there. But anyways, so we get the sob story, though, basically trying to defend them from the countertop allegation. We'll get to that in a second. This is out from the Texas Observer from Justin Miller, great reporter here, on September 1st. Angela Paxton's ties to a shell company. And they go and Justin goes through this story of this bizarre relationship that Ken Paxton and his wife have to multiple companies that are operating across Europe. It goes through this kind of trip that they're taking. Angela Paxton ends up on the board of one of these companies that is now in a lot of hot water for fraudulent and illegal business activity, right? So the point here is that, all of these kind of stories that we're about to get from Ken Paxton's lawyer about, Ken Paxton being salt of the earth, right? Just like a guy like you and I. No, I don't have the Attorney General's office to do favors for my friends. This is not somebody who is struggling paycheck to paycheck. This is somebody who is very connected. And the fact that he has so many questions about his financial dealings is constantly under investigation, I think makes this argument ridiculous. But do we want to go to his lawyer for a second, Matt? Just to hear what they're sort of focusing on, because this is the way that they're trying to focus. This thing they're trying to focus on is about the specific claim about these countertops, right? Saying that they did not get him. And I just find this to be an incredible little slam, very funny. We'll just play a second of it.
They're going to do some upgrades, and you'll see mind-numbing pictures of Angela and Ken Paxton at Home Depot, at Lowe's, pricing stoves, pricing countertops, trying to get the best buy, and ultimately deciding that despite what you hear about granite, with all due respect, Senator Paxton, their countertops are just old ratty tile.
Yeah. No, this is what's called the roast defense, where you defend your guy.
It's the Eminem defense, right?
Yeah, like he's at a Friars Club, and you just get some digs on him, and then people laugh too much to continue the charges.
So they're going to focus on that, and there are people who follow this way closer than I do. Maybe there is something there. Maybe that case is a little bit weaker on the specifics of the $20,000 in home improvements that Ken Paxton got. I find that to be an amazing and very weak part of the allegations to focus on. And I think this is because what I've been getting from friends on the ledge and from friends in the legal profession, Ken Paxton is in a lot of trouble. You saw that from the votes today, where a lot of Republicans, they didn't throw it out outright, and they also didn't accept Ken Paxton's nonsense argument that they can't include anything from before his current term as Attorney General. So we're going to be covering this. I mean, this is going to be going on for a long time. So I almost think we might need to move on because we can get way too in the weeds. We're going to be covering this. We're going to be watching this. I need to talk a little bit about the collective meltdown that we have been getting from influential people in the Republican movement since this trial. I've already talked about how Steve Bannon is making a big deal about this. All of right-wing media is making a big deal about it. Trump has mentioned it multiple times. They are, out for blood about this issue. And central to the argument that we're getting from the Republicans, from the far right people, right, the influencers, the grassroots people, whatever you want to call them, is that the Texas government Think about, if you watch this program, think about whenever we talk about the state of Texas. What do we usually talk about, Matt? We talk about attacks on trans people. We talk about outright threats to democracy like HB 2127, which, by the way, was struck down by a judge recently. There will be legal challenges. Dustin Burrows, who's going to come up in just a second, who is the author of that bill. Again, if you don't remember HB 2127, that is the bill that basically outlawed cities and localities from being able to pass regulations like water breaks for workers, right? One of the most egregious affronts on democracy in the state of Texas that I've seen in a long time, right? That's what's coming out of the Republican Party right now. And yet, these kind of Trump-aligned people, MAGA folks, are making this argument that the Texas Republican government, controlled government, has been taken over by the Democratic Party. And I don't know if you guys are as much gluttons for punishment as I am. I really do like unhinged conservative media stuff. Sometimes it's very funny to me. This incredible documentary, we could call it, was put out by the Texas Scorecard just last week on the Texas heist. Do Democrats run the Texas House? And it is one of the most incredible pieces of like Republican propaganda, right? Because in it, there is no evidence of anything, right? They don't have anything in it. All that they do is they pull clips of speeches from the Texas House of like Dade Phelan, the Speaker of the House, who's a Republican, maybe making a joke with a Democrat who's speaking, right? Like, oh, look how friendly they are, right? Like a pretty unhinged level of stuff. But if you watch the entire 40-minute documentary, you will get nothing other than Ken Paxton saying, I don't know why they're coming at me. I've just been fighting for conservative values my whole life. You see why these folks are coming at certain members is because they are trying to push the Republican Party to be people who are more and more sympathetic with their specific view of far right politics. So let's just play this for a second. This is the kind of end roll here, and we can look at some of these figures and talk about this claim that the Texas government is taken over by the Democratic Party.
Jonathan, who's responsible?
Michael, millions of Texas voters went to the polls. They elected Republicans thinking that they were going to get a certain outcome. And then you have Dade Phelan with the help of some...
Sorry. Oh man, a bunch of people voted for Republicans and they ended up getting shit that they didn't want. Oh, big surprise.
bad actors in the Texas House who run as Republicans have literally stolen the Texas House of Representatives away from the voters and given it to Democrats.
I feel like ultimately you can always point the finger to anybody who casts
coming up
a
later.
supporting vote for Dade Phelan, right? You could say everybody who votes for his leadership is in some way responsible, but ultimately he can't do this alone. He actually has to have different leaders in the caucus that are working with him. And I think it's pretty easy to see this different mix of lawmakers.
Representative Charlie Guerin, major enabler, probably a closet Democrat, needs to go. Representative Glenn Rogers, who has definitely made his fair share of enemies amongst his constituents.
You've got representatives like Glenn Rogers, J.C. Jaton, Todd Hunter, Ken King.
You also have the enforcers. Ultimately, you need people like Jeff Leach, Charlie Guerin, Craig Goldman. These are people who literally walk around the floor and tell people how to vote. Dustin Burrows, the chair of calendars, is with this group too.
Dr. Lynn Stuckey, who is out of, I think he's Wise in Denton County and Decatur and all of that. So he's another one. He's gonna have some primary challengers, some solid primary challengers.
Take a note.
Stephanie Click, Dustin Burrows, Jeff Leach.
Andrew Murr as general investigator chair, somebody who wasn't originally thought to have been a very top lieutenant and was very clearly tasked with some very important things to deliver for the
Pause
Democrats.
it.
Justin Holland says,
I just don't know how you say, like, look, I don't know anything about Murr, but like, look, maybe he wasn't thought. He's a young guy who's from a political family. Like, that seems to not check out to me.
No, I'm sorry. You know, again, like this might be a little too in the weeds for folks who don't follow Texas politics. These are some of the most conservative Republicans that are on the ballot and like in elected office. Again, Dustin Burrows literally wrote a law to prevent millions of Texans from being able to practice democracy in their cities, right? Like that is who is now a closet Democrat. Jeff Leach. Charlie Grin, Andrew Murr. Like, these guys are not your buddies. These guys are like very much Republicans. Think about all the things that have been done in the Texas House since the session, since the Texas legislature has been in session. These guys are delivering, and this is a bad thing. This is not an endorsement, right? Like, they are delivering some of the most insane right-wing conservative policy that we have seen in years, right? And they are coming for these folks because they want to replace them, not with like, oh, more salt of the earth grassroots folks, but people who are going to be more and more loyal to the Ken Paxtons, the Dan Patricks, and the Greg Abbotts. As I have said time and time again, there's a civil war going on in the Republican Party in Texas right now about who controls the party. And these are the kind of attack dogs. So like, these are all bad people. I will just say that right now. This is all bad folks doing things to each other. And this right here, like, again, like, you know, I'm sorry I can't play the entire film for y'all. I really was trying to find a clip to play because it's difficult, because there's actually no argument in here other than them talking to a bunch of influential people in the MAGA movement in the state of Texas, and then they just name names of guys that they don't like. So these guys, they want a primary, right?
And you know, maybe the who does Bannon support question was a bit silly, but I'm curious, like, who is this? How do these Republicans who are going against Paxton, how do they fit with like the broader Trump movement? Like, what's going through their heads as they're like, they think that, I assume they all think that we're actually the
I'm sorry, the Republican, I mean, like, look, and they'll, you know, they could clip this and use this for their own purpose if they want to. But it's 100% true that the Republican Party, a lot of members of the Republican Party want to be done with Trump, right? There's no doubt about that. It's not because they're liberals. It's because they don't want to have to deal with like defending insurrection, right? You know what I mean? They don't want to deal with Trump denying election results, right? So if anything, it's not that these guys have like got their spine. Yeah, they're making a move 100%. The fact is that Ken Paxton has made it so easy because of what he has done in office. You know, so it's just like the argument here that there's a bunch of closet. I mean, who was it, Charlie Grin, where they were like probably a closet Democrat, right? Is like so good, right? I will have to say, since this is Left Reckoning, you know, there is kind of similarity with some of the kind of loony people on the left too, who are just like, everyone's a secret Democrat, right? With the way the Republicans talk about their own as well. But anyways, collectively, they're losing their mind. They're making this argument that there's now this attempt to, you know, to subvert democracy. And we'll just say, I'll just say again and again and again, that what is happening right now is Ken Paxton has been found guilty, likely will be found guilty of some of the most extreme corruption you could ever do. And that's just too much for a lot of these Republicans, right? They are in control. They look like the Republican Party in Texas looks stronger than ever, despite all of this, when it comes to their statewide electoral machine. And probably the chances of, you know, Texas presidential election 2024, they are stronger than ever, right? So this is exactly when you start to see these kind of fights. Hey, we don't want to deal with the Ken Paxtons out there who are trying to do their kind of shit. And this argument that the voters of Texas got together and supported Ken Paxton because with full knowledge of his kind of alleged corruption and all this kind of stuff is just ludicrous, right? They voted for Ken Paxton because he's a Republican, and people vote for Republicans in the state. A significant part of the population votes for Republicans, not because they're personally enamored with him. He actually ran a very close primary race in the Republican primary going into this last cycle. So this idea that he is just like, look, I'm not going to say that Ken Paxton doesn't have a lot of supporters. He does, right? And the fact that he's continued to win office despite all of his scandals shows that he does have support. But this idea that it's just like all 30 million Texans, you know, we just in love with this dude. And now these dirty dozen secret Democrats in the Texas House are trying to take it away from him is ludicrous. And now the Senate, which is one of the more conservative bodies, I do think it is more conservative than the House generally, is now also not standing with him. I think portends very badly for Ken Paxton. This has been going on for a while. So we won't have any finality for a little bit, but we got to just take a second to appreciate the meltdown. So that was the more calm meltdown right, that we're getting from Republicans, right? This insane 40-minute documentary about how the Texas government is now taken over by secret Democrats. This might be one of the most unhinged things. And Matt, you have not seen this yet.
Yep, I'm getting this cold.
I did tease this to folks. We do have a special musical guest. I regret to tell you that this is not going to be a very nice listen, but it is very, very fun. I will let him introduce himself. This is a very influential podcaster on the right here in the state of Texas. You might have just seen him in that movie that we played, but he wrote a little ditty about what's happening to Ken Paxton.
Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. I wrote a song. I know what most of you are thinking. I didn't know Luke was an artist. And at the end of the show, you might still not think I'm an artist. But what you will know is I wrote a song. And I wrote a song driving up I-35, frustrated with the fact that the Texas House continues to fail conservatives time and time again.
Sorry.
You anticipated the pause, yeah. This has been one of the most successful. No, the Republican Party has not been as successful in the state in a long while as they are right now. Right, they are getting some of the most egregious stuff passed right now. It's amazing how unpleased these people are with these folks.
I just want to comment on this set, which makes me feel depressed in a way I can't really on TikTok they have those nostalgia trends where it's this is what you're this makes me feel sad in a way that's sort of like nobody should exist in this liminal space. This is a bad vibes liminal space that we got going on with this.
Oh yeah, it's very scary shit. Okay, folks, and as everyone knows, I'm a big fan of country music. I mean, this is going to be Montgomery Gentry is not one of my favorite bands, right? And this song that he's about to sort of remix for his bizarre purposes, not a great song, but I will admit I'm a redneck and I do like some kind of pop country. And this song's fun, if it comes on the radio, I'll sing along. And let's just let it speak for itself. Maybe turn your volume down if you're listening to this, because
the Texas House continues to fail conservatives time and time again. Texas House, we're a family. We got each other's backs both day and night. In this backwards place, wrong means right. And if you ain't seen Mrs. T, she takes the R's and she makes them weak. If you dare call us out, we'll say you lie. We may move our bills a little slower, but that don't mean we can't say we are better. Where I come from, we give Democrats all these chairmanships. Where I come from, we overturn some elections and impeach your Ken. Where I come from, we expanded Medicaid and gave you pot. No, I swear the Democrats don't run the show. Where I come from, see those red flag laws? Man, I swear we could kill them now. I guarantee that we never will. Those hospitals right there with the transgender care, we're giving them your money, and I'll tell you now, they'll transition all your kids with your own dollar bills. Don't let those social...
Okay, just gotta say that, the stuff that's been going on with transgender rights, so as funny as that is horrifying. And sit here and this is some of the most detached from reality kind of stuff that you will ever see in your life.
No, this is like maybe the exhibit A when you want to point to this trans stuff as being just fucking simple hysteria. That's all this is. They're going to transition not only a few kids that might have gender dysphoria or whatever, gender misalignment. It's going to be everyone. What? I mean, how counterproductive? Okay.
Do we have the stomach for a little bit more?
I think so.
Okay.
Media posts fool you. Our chamber really doesn't care for virtue. Where I come from, we give Democrats all these chairmanships. Where I come from, we overturn some elections and impeach your Ken. Where I come from, that Ramadan party's gonna have a crowd. Yeah, I'm pretty damn proud.
So again, for people who don't get that reference, there's a member of the House who is a Muslim, and they had a party to celebrate Ramadan, which like people might do for Christmas, and people showed up to it, and I guess this made these folks really, really mad.
This is great because I follow politics for a living, not Texas politics.
Yeah.
So much of this, I feel like I'm reading like James Joyce, but like Finnegan's Wake. Like, what is he referencing here? Like, you need a slow.
And I follow this stuff closely, so like I get some of the references, but the perspective is like, bizarre.
You got to be a bit more general, guys.
I'm sorry. When I found this, I caught this like 2 hours ago, and I'm sorry. I have to share it all with y'all because it's just so much fun, and we'll have our final thoughts on the other side. But let's just give them a second. Let them cook.
Where I come from, where I come from, our higher ed committee loves CRT. Where I come from, our state affairs committee loves the CCP. Where I come from, if you lie to the voters, then your bills get passed. Where I come from, the GOP priorities, they come in last. Where I come from, we expanded Medicaid and gave you pot. No, swear the Democrats don't run the show. Yeah, the Senate seems to work and make things go. Where I come from, where I come from.
All right, we're not going to finish that note.
I got a couple things. One, he really is going for it. Like he forget the self-deprecation up top. Mm-hmm. He wanted to do that.
And
like he really
multiple locations in the shoot too.
Right. And also I'm a little bit confused because like the tone is just, it seems contrary to the original. Because isn't Montgomery Gentry like where I come from, and here's the image of how idyllic it is? Yeah. So like when you follow up where I come from with like we like CRT, it sounds like you are a Democrat that likes CRT.
Well, I mean, what he's trying to say is that the House are Democrats, and this is like what their song would be. But no, I mean, I know what you mean.
Clever.
It's also bad. Like why? Like I'm sorry. Like this is one thing that's ridiculous to me about. Come on, dude. There's so many good Texas artists. Like pull like a Willie or Waylon song or a Billy Joe Shaver if you want to show your street cred. He said he was listening to the radio driving up I-35 and he heard the song and he's like, oh, this, I could rewrite this. Incredible song. Thank you very much for the music, friend. But I just want to hit at like two things here. These guys are weird ass freaks. Yeah. And don't let anybody ever tell you that the Republican Party represents normal people in any place, but especially here. That shit is the most cringe, bizarre, goofy ass shit I've heard in my life. Not only is him singing bad, whatever, we can, he's having fun. Musically, I think I will say, picky Montgomery Gentry, like, man, you want to show your connectedness to people, man, pick a good Texas artist, right? Pick somebody from here, pick a good song and redo that. These guys do not imbibe the culture as much as they want to throw like a Stetson on and do this kind of stuff. These guys are not people who are participating in Texas culture. These guys are very strange people who are living outside of the reality of the vast majority of Texans. And it's really important to never cede them that ground of being the authentic figures because they are not. Thank you very much, Joshua. We will not play that again. But I did have to share it because I found it to be. I mean, look, the meltdown. It's historic. This kind of meltdown that they're having. And look, I mean, they're losing. They're like Ken Paxton's probably going to get impeached. We'll see what happens. But like, first day looks bad. But I think beyond
one thing you told me is that those lawyers who were kind of looked like famous. They were like. Yeah, they apparently have good reputations, which kind of shows like the hand that they've been dealt with this whole thing.
They've been dealt a very bad hand. And we didn't even play the other person because I felt weird about it. But one of the other lawyers brought up his wife's illness, who's very sick, and about how her kind of wish was that she go out there and defend Ken Paxton. Which, like, I know he's trying to do to be endearing, and I'm like, I didn't want to play it because I didn't want to and I won't even say his name, whatever, right? Because I found that to be really low, frankly. And like that's like weird. They're having to play this kind of game, right? Either like really focus on Ken Paxton and Angela Paxton going to Home Depot and Lowe's. He says that like 10 times during his opening remarks, or saying my wife's sick as like part of your opening arguments. I think that they're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
That's what our good friend Cicero, who Parenti exposed as a landlord, would say. That's the pathos. That's the pathos. You don't want to rely too much on pathos when you're talking about tiles. You want to get some logos and some ethos in there as well.
Look, so this segment's gone on a little long, so we're going to move on to the interview. But I will just say this. Don't ever let people say that the Republican Party represents everyday people. They don't. I think that fucking song shows that very clearly, that they can't even do cultural politics well, right? They represent a very deranged and very conspiratorial and very unhinged part of our political system, of like our body politic, right? Use a fancy word. These guys are weird ass motherfuckers, and you guys should be confident about the fact that people who think that we should have Medicaid expansion, for example, which he complained about, or pot legalization, or water breaks for workers, or higher minimum wage, are way more in touch with everyday Texans than weird ass guys who are singing a version of a Montgomery Gentry song because they heard it on I-35 and were singing to themselves when they were driving. That's bizarre behavior that doesn't represent the majority. Don't ever give it to them. And I'm very much looking forward to Ken Paxton being impeached, and the continuation of the plan of the Democratic takeover of the Republican Party in the state of Texas.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I can't wait. Do we have a time frame on this? When does it expect to hit the rubber hit the road?
I mean, it's probably going to be like a month, I would say. But anything can happen.
Right. Yeah.
And then next up will be school choice. So there'll be plenty more exciting stuff coming from the Texas Ledge. But anyways, appreciate everyone.
Not that David smokes a whole lot that I know of, but like the Texans I know smoke weed.
You kidding me? Willie Nelson, Willie Nelson has a weed strain that he can't even sell in the state of Texas.
Right.
I had to go to Colorado to smoke Willie Nelson's weed, which was a very funny experience. And I mean, that shit's extremely popular, which we got to move on. So I won't dwell too much, but like, that's why, by the way, HB 2127, which apparently was written by a Democrat, Dustin Burrows, Republican. They're just deranged. That's why they were attacking local government, because local groups here in Texas, people who I really respect, who are really smart, are saying, hey, you know what? There's a kind of bigger political issue with dealing with the partisan politics in the state. But if you go to people and you ask them a question, like, do you think people should have a water break at work? They say yes. Do you think that weed should be legalized or at least decriminalized? They say yes. And people were getting a lot of success on that. So the Republican Party, led by secret Democrats, got together to try to, break these kind of laws. And also, I mean, I probably just need to do a whole segment on it. But after HB 2127 was struck down by a judge, it's going to go to the Texas Supreme Court. And I'm sure they'll uphold it. They might uphold it in some limited version, but it'll be upheld in some way. Dustin Burrows goes out on a tweet storm, and it's like, this opinion of this ruling from the judge is not worth the paper that's printed on. And also, I think that anybody out there should just act as if HB 2127 is the law of the land. Just bizarre for a party that is always trying to portray itself as the people who love the Constitution and love law and order to basically outright just say, hey, ignore the legal system when it's an issue for us. And also, this is why we need business courts in the state of Texas. So anyway, we're going to be watching Ken Paxton. I'm sure on Thursday I'll have more of an update. This will be ongoing. It's going to be very funny, and I hope that he gets impeached. Let's go over to our conversation with Robert on tech censorship. Matt and I will come by, say goodbye to y'all. Come join us in the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning. We're going to be talking all of y'all favorites, boys. Bill Maher. We're talking Jimmy Dore, too. Is that happening?
I could do some Jimmy Dore, yeah.
We'll see how Matt is also being, everyone give a big thumbs up to Matt. Matt is beating a cold right now and is being very generous with his time and Constitution. So we appreciate that very much, friend.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm driven by just a profound hatred for Bill Maher. That's keeping me going. So yeah, we'll see you guys on the other side. Check out Robert is a great journalist. I mean, he follows a lot of topics that I'm very interested in, and this recent piece is it's my flu game, Tommy. This recent piece. I was in Salt Lake City though, ordering pizza last night. I was down in North Carolina catching a cold. But yeah, check this out, and we'll see you patreon.com/leftreckoning for those of you who want to join us in the post game. See you, folks. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, David Griscom, as always. Hello, David.
Hey, brother.
And joining us once again is Robert Skvarla. Robert is a journalist. You can see his bylines at Unicorn Riot, which is what we'll be talking about today. Also, Geopolitical Econ and Cremeg. He's also the proprietor of Mondo Americano. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on today, guys. It's always a pleasure to talk to you both.
So we have this piece, and this is actually something we've covered prior with Nando Vila, friend of the show, in regard to the Pegasus, sort of proper noun, I guess, in this piece. Allied, this is the headline here from Unicorn Riot, Robert's piece. Aimed at protests, surveillance contractors' new owners expand spy tech portfolio. Now, Robert, give us the lay of the land here, including these baseball cards that are being generated and who they're being generated about.
Yeah, so a little background. I got into this subject out of something I don't normally do. Normally I'm associated as a conspiracy guy. We talked about the church committee last time I was on. But I was at the 2020 protests in Philly. I saw when people got tear gassed on the freeway. I was standing there. I got tear gassed myself. So the 2020 protests have been a kind of an obsession for me. It realigned the brain chemicals in my head. So I've kind of been obsessed with it ever since then. One of the things I've been doing is following social media surveillance that was happening during the protests. One of the things I also post about frequently is COINTELPRO, the government surveillance program in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So during the protests, I knew something was happening, but I couldn't really figure it out. And I started reading up on COINTELPRO, and that helped inform how I look at the world today, because all of those things are still happening in different ways. So in October of 2022, Senator Ron Wyden released a report on his website from DHS. It was an internal report generated the year prior, and it was about social media surveillance. Well, not just social media surveillance, but a lot of things DHS's Office of Intelligence and Analysis had done during the 2020 protests. And one of the things that jumped out at me was this little line, one word, tangles. I wasn't familiar with it, but it was listed as a social media aggregation tool. And it was used as part of the baseball cards, also known as OBRs or operational background reports. These were reports that DHS INA compiled on people, essentially intelligence dossiers. Some of them were targeting journalists, from what I understand. I know in the report it states at least one was targeting a journalist who had no actual association with the protests beyond writing about them. A couple of other people involved, I believe the editor of Lawfare and someone else, were actually targeted by DHS because they had posted public documents about DHS spying. So what these were, the OBRs, it was just a compilation of information. It was past criminal history, travel history, and then what they labeled publicly relevant social media. So anything that you might have posted online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. This information was used to classify people as domestic violent extremists, which was DHS's phrasing for, I guess, domestic terrorists or protesters, what we knew them as.
Muted myself. We should put this in the context of today in Georgia.
Yes.
RICO charges leveled against like 60 plus, I believe, members of the Stop Cop City protest movement.
Correct.
Some for just like handing out flyers. So this is, I mean, not that we need to tell a lot of people who listen to the show, but just like, this is a serious issue.
Yeah, I mean, so when you actually look at the information that was being used, one of the things you can look to are fusion centers, which are intelligence sharing hubs that exist in every state. There's a kind of nebulous ownership of these. Technically, they're owned by the states, but DHS is involved, the FBI is involved, sometimes the military and private intelligence organizations, like businesses. So in Maine, for instance, information was being shared about protesters. One that was shared from the Maine Information and Analysis Center, their fusion center, was a 19-year-old TikToker who was allegedly promoting terrorism by making TikToks about throwing water balloons at tanks. In another instance, I believe they had shared information about bricks being staged, because one of the conspiracy theories that formed around the protests is that Antifa was pre-staging piles of bricks in front of protest sites so they could toss them at cops. This information actually came from a Trump supporting account with no prior history of corroborating or offering any legitimate information. So stuff that was getting sent out there was essentially just whatever they could pull to justify what they needed. And they would use it to spy on anybody. In Texas, the Austin Regional Information Center spied on a local peaceful protest, Stay Black and Live, which had formed around Black Lives Matter. Nothing that could code them as violent extremists, but they still used the information to justify social media surveillance and in-person surveillance of that event.
Yeah, and okay, go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to ask, I mean, do you have a sense of how big the scope is of this? Like how many people are getting pulled into this, or is it sort of nebulous at this point?
It's all nebulous. Just today, the Brennan Center had posted information about ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. They were creating fake social media accounts. They had policies set up where they could do things like CBP, for instance, has a policy known as masked monitoring, where they can create a fake account to get information on social media. Now, allegedly, they're not allowed to engage with people. They can't like, share, whatever. But if you follow journalists like Trevor Aronson from The Intercept, he's written a lot about how the FBI and other agencies were essentially trying to instigate using informants to instigate things. I forget the guy's name. I think it might be like Mickey Windecker. He published an article a couple of months ago, Aronson did, about this guy, and he was essentially trying to get protesters to purchase weapons and do things that we would normally consider to be entrapment. So it's all sort of nebulous right now. But one of the things that you can sort of glean from this is social media was used in various ways to target people by many different agencies. I believe even the U.S. Postal Service had a program known as ICOP, where they were using social media surveillance to spy on protesters.
As a journalist who covers this stuff, does the independent contractor angle make this harder to pierce the veil of secrecy on this stuff?
Yeah, so the thing with Cobwebs, they're a private organization. The reason I wrote about them, I've been watching them a little bit since I saw that the report on Wyden's website. So I started looking them up, and there wasn't a lot of information. Out of necessity, organizations like that don't want to offer up a lot of information about themselves. But over the last couple of months to year, stories did start popping up. I know The Intercept, I think, just reported on a contract they might have with Customs and Border Patrol or ICE. I forget which. I believe it's ICE. They also have contracts with, Vice reported on a connection that they have to the Department of the Treasury with the IRS. Their criminal investigation unit uses Tangles as well to do social media surveillance. They have contracts with fusion centers. The LAPD has looked at their software. It's unclear if they've used it. So it's very nebulous in the sense that there's lots of private contractors like them out there with these contracts, and they license their software. Sometimes when they get known like this, it's possible the agency may stop using them, but then they move on to another one. The Brennan Center in 2020 or 2021 posted an article about the LAPD using fake accounts to spy on people, like fake social media accounts. In the course of that article, they revealed that they had, I believe, either used or tested 10 different pieces of software from different contractors. So these organizations, police departments, fusion centers, government agencies, they're always cycling through and looking for something that's better that can help them find what they need.
And let's just define open source intelligence, or OSINT, I guess is the phrase that's coming up. 'Cause just from a naive standpoint, I would have liked like open source intelligence, meaning like everybody coming together to like verify facts and stuff using the internet to like look up some weird things that were happening around, like aimed at protesters in Minneapolis, for instance, during those protests. But how is it actually being, especially when like major law enforcement agencies are getting involved with it? It's kind of a perversion of like maybe what the selling terminology is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so when you look at something like this, one of the things that comes up frequently is this concept in the United States of third-party doctrine. It's this idea that if you voluntarily give your information to a private vendor, like an app, because when you download an app, there's always those terms of service that you agree to. Barely anyone ever reads them. And typically what's in there is it states they can share your information or sell it however they see fit. So one of the things that we've seen is that government agencies, the military, different private organizations will purchase this information and use it for nefarious reasons. Now, this isn't just something recent. The idea of like the third-party doctrine goes back a long time. We had talked about the church committee hearings last time, and I brought up projects Minaret and Shamrock, where it was telecoms like RCA, Global, and ITT were sharing information, and this was being used in different ways to spy on Vietnam War protesters, for instance. This still happens up through to today. I believe, I forget if it was the Army, I forget which branch, but someone was purchasing information to spy on Muslim Americans a couple of years ago. And they were using things like Muslim dating apps and other things like that to get information on people. It's something that happens, it just happens, going back years. In 2016 at the Black Lives Matters protest around Ferguson, there was a service known as Geofedia, which was feeding information about location data to police departments, specifically around like where they could track movements of people using this information. And it's something that still largely happens through services. I think I briefly mention it in the article when I talk about what are known as MAIDs, or mobile application IDs, where you can actually get this information from someone's smartphone and you can use it to trace their movements. Mobile advertising IDs, sorry, not application.
Right, yeah. And, I want to get to some more meta questions first, but before we do that, remind us about NSO Group, who we discussed with Nando Villa.
Yeah, so this one, I will admit, I haven't gotten too deep into NSO Group. It only came up briefly in my research because the FBI recently declassified some information on them. Very little, not a lot. And that's where the information on the mobile advertising IDs came up, because that's where I saw the FBI had been requesting it. In one instance, they had requested information on New York Times reporters. So this is being used to track journalists, to track protesters. And I believe out of the January 6th insurrection, that information was requested and taken to find some of the people who were at the Capitol that day. So NSO Group is also, like Cobwebs, a Israel-based spyware firm. They were offering a program known as Pegasus, which was being used by governments like Hungary to spy on media and opposition parties. And the FBI briefly considered using the service along with another one, I believe, known as Phantom or Phantoms. Although, from my understanding, the FBI never officially used it. But again, it was something that could be used to hack smartphones, get location data, or just track information.
And, this kind of question, we had Yasha Levine, author of Surveillance Valley, on the program a few months ago. And that book kind of informs this question,
Absolutely.
which is this a perversion of the internet, or is this why the internet has been allowed to sort of flourish in these past 25 years? Because, look, obviously you want to sell stuff for ads and things like that, but it also allows a certain type of surveillance capability that might be useful to the government.
Yeah, so I think there are, for instance, legitimate reasons to want to monitor certain aspects of like online communications. This goes back to the very beginning. There's a great article by a journalist, Julian Dibble, from the early 90s, known as A Rape in Cyberspace, where it was about something known as MUDs, or multi-user dungeons, where people would create personalities and then essentially role-play or cosplay a character. But they ran into this problem where one user decided they were going to sexually assault other characters in character. And no one knew how to deal with this because the spirit of the internet from very early on was this libertarian idea of anything goes. So essentially, to get around that, what someone did is they just, one of the, I believe, mods or whoever just went in and just deleted that guy and got rid of him. But it's this idea that in cyberspace, anything sort of goes, and that's true to this day. And we see that very much on Twitter now with the way Musk is handling it. You know, you see a rise in hate speech, anti-Semitism, all of this stuff. So there are legitimate reasons why you might want to monitor social media. It gets into the question, though, of how do you do that without violating civil rights? And one of the problems that we're seeing is that, not even recently, but historically, law enforcement and intelligence agencies aren't good when it comes to dealing with civil liberties. They just typically don't care. I mentioned the LAPD. They come up frequently because they're trying a lot of different technologies along with groups like the FBI and other organizations, DHS. So when we look at is it a perversion, is it not, it's hard to say because the internet has always been this space where it's a free-for-all. So within that space, monitoring things is going to be difficult, if you even if you have a legitimate purpose in doing so. When we look at the George Floyd protests, though, as I mentioned before, there were lots of just peaceful protests that were happening, and intelligence agencies or intelligence services within agencies like DHS abused that privilege of being able to monitor what was going on. They targeted selectively organizations like Black Lives Matter, which, you know, there was some violence at protests. No one really disputes that, but the nature of what was happening, it wasn't organized in any meaningful way. Antifa was not this group that was orchestrating things. George Soros was not in charge, right? So when you consider that and you consider what DHS was doing, it's hard to say that they were using that power that they had in any kind of measured way.
Yeah, I mean, I share your obsession with the sort of retconning of these protests because, you know, I saw Dave Smith on Tim Pool's show like a year or so ago talking about how, yeah, Trump was bad too. And then I watched more of the context of the clip and he basically called that entire summer like a color revolution for the Democratic Party. And it's just like, I think that's pretty insulting. One, to like, I think things that maybe get labeled color revolutions too often overseas, but also just the Democrats, yeah, they benefited, I will admit, they benefited from those protests just from votes. But like to say that Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi were like, yeah, get out there and be violent. No, they got in kente cloths to stop people from protesting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you look at the course of the protests, I mean, I would never say that the protests were an op in any way. But if you look at, for example, like in Minneapolis, the fire that started in the police station, a Proud Boy was involved with that. So unless you think the Proud Boys are also a Democratic op, which weirdly a lot of people on the right seem to believe, they think anyone on their side is an op when it goes against whatever they're trying to do. But if you look at the way the protests unfolded, there was a lot of violence happening, and a lot of it was just very chaotic. There was no central organizing body or even necessarily an ideology, which is kind of what DHS was pursuing. The guy who was responsible for creating or ordering the baseball cards was the acting Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis, Brian Murphy. He was actually responsible for reclassifying a DHS designation, violent offenders, which was a broad categorization that is used for people on the left and right, to a much more focused one, which they called violent Antifa anarchists inspired. So it was like this idea that DHS was very targeted on just this leftist ideology. And if you look to journalism from people like Aronson, you can see they were trying to set people up in the course of those protests. So it's hard to say that like the 2020 protest was a Democratic op. You know, it doesn't make sense when you actually dig down into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we saw this. There's a through line in this against the left. I mean, even the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, where Red Fonfallis was given a gun by a guy who was an FBI informant, who was like a brother with an FBI agent or something like that, if memory serves. But yeah, a couple things to wrap up. Is there has this affected the way you use the internet? And is there any best practice? Because like people recommend Signal, and I feel like that might be a little bit of not the solution.
Doesn't Yasha Levine not
know.
recommend Signal?
I think he doesn't, yeah, because of, like, well, I think the idea is that, like, and this is not just summary, but like, actually, that's used for spies, like our spies, and we need other traffic to mask that traffic in case that it gets checked out. But like, you shouldn't count on any of these things being actually like secure from the government getting into them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you go to a protest, you shouldn't really be taking a phone with you if you are expecting anything to happen, or even really in general if you're going to a protest, because it's one of those things they're going to be able to track you in some way. Mobile advertising IDs are used, they purchase this information from third-party vendors. So if they need to know who you are, they can eventually find that out. It's hard to say what best practices are in situations like this because it's very amorphous and it's always changing. I mean, the thing about cobwebs that's interesting to me is it was created by 3 intelligence agents. So a lot of these private intelligence firms are coming out of, like, the CIA, or in the case of cobwebs, it was ex-IDF and Mossad people. So these people are looking for ways to get around the best practices that you're already developing. They're constantly looking for new ways to get this information so that they can track you, so that they can find information that they need. Cobwebs advertises themselves as like OSINT for good. And I'm sure they probably do have some valid things that they do. They allegedly, their service is used for combating sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and things that are mostly noble causes. But what you see is that these organizations, like Cobwebs, for instance, in 2021, Facebook removed 200 accounts that they said were fake accounts created either by Cobwebs or their clients, and they were being used to monitor political groups in Mexico and I think Hong Kong. So intelligence agencies are constantly evolving, and they're using this third-party doctrine to get around what they would normally have to work with, or like the limits that they would have imposed on them.
What's the best way to fight this sort of privatization of intelligence? Like, this is part of like the defund, like you don't get to make contracts. Look, if you want to spy on people, invent your own little gadgets and spy on them after you talk to a judge. What do you think?
I mean, one of the immediate things would be legislating around the third-party doctrine. The idea that a vendor, like when you sign a terms of service, they can't just have this blanket approval to do whatever they want with your information. And there have been efforts to do that. It's just largely been unsuccessful in any kind of way that would be meaningful, because that information is still being used. It is still being sold. So legislating something around that would probably be like an immediate thing that people could focus on.
Yeah, and Tim Shorrock, who's written on these things, he's talked about intelligence being privatized as like, that's kind of a way to get, for you can't FOIA private companies.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, so I do have a FOIA request in on this contract from DHS. I don't know how long that'll take, I'm sure, because I'm just a guy and I'm not like a company. I'm not the Brennan Center or someone like that. I might not get it quickly. But finding information even outside of those channels, you can look in different ways. I found this information about cobwebs by going on usaspending.gov. That's where I've been finding a lot of information about Havana syndrome, tracking down contracts to private organizations or universities that are getting funding from the government. So following the money can also be useful when they post it. A lot of this information can be difficult because they don't always post that information publicly. But I would just suggest going through like public contracting sites to see if you can find something that, strikes your fancy or is an issue that you're concerned about.
And just lastly, there's a lot of attention on these sorts of topics lately. Some of it may be confused because our boy Elon Musk is putting his oar in. I'm just curious what your sense of proportion you'd give to people who have maybe come to this stuff lately and are hearing that, actually, all this stuff is aimed at Republicans because they're racist now. Do you think like there's a ability to bridge some sort of divide here and get people up to speed in a way that is politically educational, or do you think this is all just getting confused?
I mean, so broadly speaking, this type of thing does target people on the left and the right. Like I was saying, the mobile advertising IDs were used to track people who were at the insurrection. So occasionally it does target the right. It's just that frequently it doesn't, because the institutions using this, if not overtly right-wing, certainly have right-wing sympathies. Police departments, DHS and groups like that. I've only recently come along to this myself because of the 2020 protests, so I'm still learning. I would just say to people, when they're looking at this to see how it's applied, generally it's going to target the left disproportionately because of the things that the left pursues: economic equality, racial justice. These issues are things that are generally in opposition to capitalism. So the institutions that are there to protect capitalism, like police departments, intelligence agencies, are going to use the tools that they have, in front of them to suppress that. As you mentioned earlier, Stop Cop City with the RICO charge. I believe the date that was issued on the warrant was the date of George Floyd's death, if I remember correctly, reading today. So, a lot of this stuff isn't even, secret. They're out there purposely going after left-wing organizations in ways that are absurd. It's just going to be difficult, but you have to persist.
Right on. People follow Robert on Twitter.
Right now.
Robert Skvarla. Robert, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Very nice.
Yeah, great talking with Robert.
Well, yeah, folks. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on episode 134 of Left Reckoning. Matt, we're getting up there. We'll be at 150 soon.
I know, goddamn.
But folks, it's not over. We're jumping over the post game, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We got some fun clips. We'll be taking some questions from the audience over there, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I'll be back this Thursday with the Griscom stream. I'll be back this Sunday with the bonus episode. Please consider supporting the show, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Thanks everyone for listening, hanging out with us, and we'll see you soon.
Oh yeah, just one note. Probably just gonna do Discord questions tonight and no voicemail, just because I'm dragging.
Yeah, we gotta get Matt. We gotta get Matt some NyQuil. So Discord only.
See if
we're gonna be going over a little bit faster than normal, so we'll be over there in probably 5-10 minutes.
Yep, 5. Well, we're gonna really try this time.
All right, see y'all soon.